Welcome back from the break, everybody. I hope you managed to grab a bite to eat or have the chance to catch up with somebody in the networking space in this portal. I'm Dianne McGrath, I'm the Reduce Acting Program Leader, and in Carly Verghese's absence today, I'd like to welcome you all to the Reduce session for the CRC's conference. Now, before we get started onto the session, I would like to do a little bit of housekeeping. You might have noticed in the portal next to the screen on the top right-hand corner, they've got three options for us to interact during the session. There's a chat section, which we're probably all quite familiar with using all the different platforms we do these days for virtual meetings. There's also the Q&A section, and there's an activity feed section as well. And I just want to give you a bit of delineation about what the three different sections do. So the chat section, that's where, as you've been doing, you've been commenting or thanking people for their presentations. That's perfect, the great place to do that. Thank you. The Q&A, that's where we'd like you to continue to put your questions, and we'll be seeing them back of house here to be able to ask them at the end of the sessions. And the third part you've got there is called the activity feed. Now, this is a little bit different. You might not have come across this before. And so it's been shared with me that the function of this part is about where you might go and do not necessarily a networking, we do that during the breaks, but a chance to connect with people that might be of interest to yourself and your business or your organisation. You might want to share who you are and what you do, and maybe even share that you work in the food transformation space or composting, black soldier flies, packaging, whatever it is. So you might be able to make some new connections related to the particular talk that's going on at the time as well. Hopefully that's been helpful, and we'll give you a bit more engagement in the three different ways that we can with the session. Now onto the session itself. As the agenda indicates, there are two main parts to the Reduce session today. In the first part, we're going to get a keynote on an important project that we have running in the CRC, which is delivering on a case for tax reform to increase food donation by businesses. The second part of our session will be a program overview that I'll be delivering, and then we're going to go into a deep dive onto the role of packaging in food waste. And we're going to have a dynamic panel of experts that are going to be assisting us with that. So first of all, our keynote. And in this instance, I'd like to invite you to welcome our guest speaker today, and that's Catherine Dianne. Now, Catherine Dianne's from BDO, and she's going to be delivering the keynote address on that tax reform project. And Catherine's a partner with tax advisory at BDO and has worked closely with Food Bank, KPMG and Woolworths, and a more extensive team indeed in delivering on this important project. Following Catherine's talk, there'll be time for a Q&A. So please do put your questions or comments in the Q&A, and I'll make sure to direct them to Catherine at this end of things. So if I may, hand over to you, Catherine, to please share with us information on the tax reform project.
Thank you very much, Dianne, and it's great to be at the Fight Food Waste conference today. I'm here to talk about an important tax reform proposal that we've been working on with Fight Food Waste CRC and Food Bank. It's called the National Food Waste Tax Incentive. Now, as Dianne mentioned, please feel free to ask questions as we go through via the chat function, and I will endeavour to answer those questions. So really here today, we're talking about the quite eye-watering amount of food waste, the food waste problem in Australia, which is now highlighted at $36 billion per annum. So this project has an aim of delivering on two key aims of Fight Food Waste Australia. Firstly, stopping food waste, and secondly, ensuring more edible food actually goes to food relief organisations such as Food Bank, Second Bite, etc. When we were first asked to consider the need for reform, we went out to Food Bank Australia's offices, and in fact their warehouse, to understand their operations. And this photo is actually all the food relief packages that were being delivered to families in need after the flood. So it had been bushfires, floods, and then of course COVID. The disruption to supply chains was a huge challenge for food relief organisations. and hence there is a need for tax reform in this area. So I'm going to cover today 3 key areas. 1, why is there a need for a national food waste tax incentive? Secondly, what are the key design features of this proposed reform policy? And finally, how much will it cost and what are the benefits for Australia? At the end, we've also got a short video produced by the Fight Food Waste CRC to show you. So firstly, why do we need it? Well, the $36 billion problem is a staggering amount, and this is a direct cost to the Australian economy. So secondly, it would also directly assist in achieving the 50% target for reduction in food waste in Australia by 2030, which was a federal government initiative announced back in 2017. And finally, the National Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre has identified tax reform as a key approach for reducing food waste. So it's something that hasn't really been a feature at the moment. So there is no specific deductibility regime for food waste, and we consider that this would be an important initiative. So moving on. It's important to consider what do other countries do, and certainly in research that's been undertaken, we did look at a number of countries, and many OECD countries, including the US, UK, France, Canada, the Netherlands, all have specific tax regimes dealing with food waste tax incentives, and they've provided significant benefits for those countries. It's been highlighted in various studies that actually tax and fiscal incentives are very important and one of the most effective ways to motivate industry to donate food to food relief charities. So often there's obviously different streams where food waste can go, and charities are competing with other streams such as green energy, etc. So it's important to level the playing field to ensure that there are incentives for donation of food, edible food, to charities. So what does it involve? It involves the introduction of a new tax incentive to apply to donations of food, as well as services such as transport and logistics. Now, in a country as large as Australia, we know that some of the transport and logistics costs can be as much, if not more, than the actual cost of the food that's being donated, which at the moment can be an impediment to those donations happening. So the incentive is going to be limited to donations made by businesses to a registered charity providing food to people in need. We have proposed several options for reform. One option is a 2-tiered tax incentive in the form of a tax offset, and this could be refundable or non-refundable. So for small businesses, for example, primary producers with turnover of up to 20 million, there could be a cash refundable tax offset of 45% based on the cost of the donated food or services. So that would be a net 20% tax cash incentive. For larger businesses, we proposed a 40% non-refundable tax offset. So that's businesses with turnover of over 20 million. So that would be a net 10% incentive. Another option is for an enhanced deductibility regime. So it's similar to what's been adopted in the United States. So, for example, you could provide a taxpayer with a choice to deduct 200% of the cost or 100%, 120% of the market value of the goods or services provided. Now, how much will it cost and what are the benefits? Look, indicative estimates indicate costs of around $100 million per annum in comparison to the large offsetting social, economic and environmental benefits of approximately $2 billion per annum. And of course, against the huge cost of food waste to the Australian economy, it's a fairly small reform measure. And what are the benefits? Well, we consider that the National Food Waste Tax Incentive will benefit all Australians now and into the future. It'll help 3 things. 1, the environment, help Australia achieve its food waste reduction target of 50% by 2030. It'll help people in need. It will encourage companies to actively reduce food waste and provide that food relief through the donation of food and services to Australian charities for people in the community. And thirdly, it's about jobs and the economy. So we consider there's going to be significant benefits in stimulating economic activity by boosting food supply chains and services through this incentive. So finally, we really consider the proposal is a win-win for Australia, the people, the environment and the economy. I've now got a short video that was produced by the Fight Food Waste Cooperative Research Centre to show you. And please feel free to come through with any of those Q&A questions.
Australia is a standout producer of high-quality, safe food that the world wants, but we take it for granted. We produce enough food to feed 75 million people in a country with a population of only 25 million. 7.3 million tonnes of food is wasted in Australia each year, enough to fill the Melbourne Cricket Ground to the brim almost 9 times. This is a $20 billion cost to the Australian economy. Australia's National Food Waste Strategy prioritises firstly avoiding food waste, then secondly donating edible food so it gets to the stomachs of hungry Australians. Deciding to donate surplus food and then getting it across a country as big as Australia is a logistical jigsaw puzzle, and currently producers, manufacturers and the providers of transportation, pallet hire, storage and refrigeration are expected to give their services without any form of incentive. While this is honourable, it's a difficult decision for the businesses to make, especially when times are tough. And while they want to help get the food to where it needs to go, the Australian food industry has had a tumultuous 12 months already dealing with COVID-19. The National Food Waste Tax Incentive is a way to ensure more food gets to where it's needed rather than being wasted. So how does it work? We have a farmer who has 500 kilograms of perfectly edible excess zucchinis that they would usually get $750 for at market. Instead of dumping them, the farmer pays a local transport company $250 to take the zucchinis to Food Bank. Under our proposed system, the farmer would be entitled to a net cash tax refund of $200. In this example, the SME truck driver is also supported to take that surplus food to cold storage. And if it stays over the weekend, then support will be provided to the owner of that storage facility, as well as the next truck driver who delivers it to Food Bank on Monday when the warehouse is open. The National Food Waste Tax Incentive unlocks additional economic activity in the Australian food industry. Jobs will be created to facilitate the allocation and delivery of all of this surplus food.
If there was a tax incentive or a tax reform in this regard, what it would do for us is then it would allow us to strategise our decisions in relation to the donations to Food Bank or, those kind of similar bodies. And then we could also look to employ people to run this part of the facility of our business, to manage product and manage the supply chain.
We like to donate already. If there was that incentive, we'd probably donate a little bit more, and it's helping the needy around the country, which at the moment I think there'll be a lot of people out there that could use a bit of help.
Rather than throwing the food out, if you could give it to somebody who's in need or somebody that would appreciate the food that's in front of them, rather than it not being quite up to spec in city markets and having to throw it out because it's not right. It's going to a good cause, it's feeding people, but then it helps not having to throw stock out as well.
The National Food Waste Tax Incentive is net benefit to the Australian economy. It will go a long way to reduce the $20 billion impact that food waste currently has and make sure our premium food is enjoyed by all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Catherine. That's an excellent presentation on the project. And I see we've got a couple of questions that have come through the Q&A, if you don't mind me addressing some of them to you. One of them is really around the impact of this work. So what I know that the team has been involved with the report as well as the production of this fantastic video. do we know how well it's resonated with those in Treasury or other government agencies at this stage?
Yeah, so I understand discussions are continuing with Treasury, and yeah, it's still obviously at the reform stage and in proposal stage, so it's under consideration. But obviously, yeah, support is, you know, further political support is required to get such a policy into law.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it's a long process, isn't it, through government? I think that time frame, it's hard to determine how things will happen in what how quickly. What was the structure in regards to the actual offer that went through to the government, the recommendations? What would be the best way to encapsulate the summary of that for businesses? What does it mean?
Look, what would it mean for businesses? I think it would generally be a very positive thing for businesses, because they would be incentivised through the tax system to donate food as well as services to, this is for edible food, to food relief organisations. It would be either, what would it mean on a practical level, either a cash refund of tax paid, or it would be a credit against their tax, depending on the turnover threshold. This was under the proposal.
Yeah, and I guess there's probably a lot of considerations that government will need to take into account, including at the state level there, because I see a comment in the Q&A around the challenges of balancing that against things such as landfill levies or other, I guess, economic tools at state base. Do you have any thoughts on that as well?
Look, I mean, I think it's really a matter of weighing up the costs to the economy of the huge food waste problem and utilising the tax system, you know, for social good. And it's great to be involved in a project where you are using the tax system in a very positive way. And I think, you know, it's really an important ESG reform agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for your summary of that. And I think that your recommendations with this project and what the team has done behind the scenes could have some large financial reimbursement for businesses. So there's a great economic outcome, as well as feeding hungry people and reducing waste. So thank you, Catherine, very much. And please, everybody today, make some comments in the chat to thank Catherine for her fantastic presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'll be just sharing my screen. Where I'll be going through an overview of what's been happening in the Reduce program for the last 12 months on behalf of the team. And on behalf of the team, I'm referring to, of course, Carly Verghese, who you all know and love very well. And she was messaging me last night saying hello to everybody and wishes everyone well. So you've got myself, obviously, and we have Dr. Eloise Florence as well, who's our program coordinator for the team. And we're delighted to work with all of the different project leaders and project teams in delivering quite a phenomenal amount of work in this particular area. So reducing food waste is obviously one of the primary goals here to help us in Australia hit that 12.3 Sustainable Development Goal of halving food waste by 2030. And within the CRC, that 2028 target we have is focused very strongly on that 30 million tonnes of reducing food waste, which of course will lower greenhouse gases as well. And we see this as in something which increases industry profitability by over $2 billion over the time and rescuing over 20 million kilograms of food, something which Catherine highlighted before is something which is ongoingly needed in this sector. The portfolio of projects at the moment in the Reduce stream are extraordinary. They vary everything from commercialisation of the direct tool, which I'll touch on in detail in a moment, right through to the taxation reform that Catherine discussed. And what I plan to do in the talk today is just touch on a couple of key outcomes from some of the important projects we have in this area. And at the end, we'll go on to deep diving into packaging, as I mentioned. So first, direct. Now, this is a fantastic tool. Imagine if you could identify where in your supply chain food was being lost or wasted. What would that do to business? What would that do as well to food waste as a whole? Well, that's what the Direct tool can help a business do. Direct stands for Dynamic Industry Resource Efficiency Calculation Tool. Direct, sharper. Now, this tool is extraordinary in the way that it's able to analyse food waste across a business's supply chain. And it's exciting to see that next week, the Direct team are launching the tool. Now, I don't know if you probably can't click on the URL that's in that slide there, but if you search for Empower and Big Marker, that's BIGMARKER, you'll come up with the registration page for the launch. And it's an exciting time for the team as it commercialises this product. So recognition to Dr. Simon Lockery at RMIT, as well as the team at Empower that Vic Baricello is running. The next project I wanted to highlight that's in the Reduce portfolio is looking at food banks stakeholder engagement, and there's a lot of work that fits under the food rescue area within the Reduce team, and this is one of the many projects in this area. Now, as we're coming out of COVID-19 and the pandemic into a new world, we've seen an increasing demand for food relief over this time, and in fact, right now we know from the 2020 Hunger Report that there's nearly 30% of those who are food insecure have experienced that for the very first time. This particular project will deliver the 2021 Hunger Report very soon. You'll watch out for that publication. But the work that this team has done in the meantime as well is to see how they've been able to understand what's going on within that volunteer engagement space. Now, COVID's had an impact there on this project too, and it has for quite a few of the projects across the CRC. In this instance, they couldn't engage with the volunteers at the local level at the operations. So what they've done is they've changed tack a bit and are looking at what's happening at the national office as well as the corporate partners. And a huge thanks to Dr. Ufamali Marakoon, who runs this team with Sarah Pennell from Food Bank. And I know we've got listening on the call today, one of our PhD students, and that's Khulud, who's just about to publish her first piece. So congratulations on that, Khulud. The next project I'd like to touch on is the food bank meals versus via the Why Waste app. Now, I don't know how much you know about the Why Waste app, but it's a fantastic app. It facilitates the discounted sale of end-of-day food from quick service restaurants, or QSRs as they're called, to consumers, so that prevents that surplus going to landfill. Now, the first phase of this project is what we've looked to do is to bring that into the food rescue space. So they completed the first phase of this project in the last 12 months, and that the team there, RMIT, Food Bank and Why Waste, worked on expanding the app to include the option of QSRs to be able to provide a free meal to people in need in their community. Now the project is expanding. The second level of that is to work within New South Wales EPA in the partnership as well to look at a pilot of the app in QSRs in New South Wales. What a great innovation. Imagine being able to provide a free food bank meal to those in need just through use of an app straight to someone who needs it into a QSR restaurant. So well done to the team on this project. It's pretty exciting. And I know Dr. Li Ping Fong as well as Sarah Pennell from Food Bank are doing a lot of work behind the scenes here. The importance of preserving food through use of appropriate packaging is something we'll explore in a lot more detail later on in the session. But one of the projects that's underway at the moment seeks to, well, it's really looking at novel insulation materials for food using food waste. So the aim of this particular project is to integrate agricultural wastes into the composition of wool pack thermal liners. So that's going to improve material costs, cold chain integrity and thermal performance of the products themselves. And as you can see on this slide, there's a range of different agricultural waste streams that are being trialled in this area. And I know that the team at QUT under Dr. Mark Harrison have been driving this project with the partnership with Planet Protector Packaging, and where it's become a very highly sought after project to work on in some capacity by the students at QUT. Australian eco-organic bananas are in high demand in niche Asian markets. However, there's a lot of fruit loss and downgrading of the fruit quality through transportation of these bananas overseas, and sometimes be between 2 and 10% of the shipped product. So this project itself is looking to, well, follow the fruit, to understand what's going on in temperature control across that supply chain, and particularly at the points of handling, and understand how we can look at new initiatives to improve banana transportation and quality outcomes to reduce waste across that supply chain. Now, this is another project where the team were affected by COVID-19 and being able to undertake some aspects of their research. So they very creatively found some solutions that they worked with overseas colleagues to understand what's going on with some consignment that was in Southeast Asia, and are examining right now what we can do at the domestic level, lessons that we can apply then to the international market. And well done to Dr. Andrew Nish at Queensland Department of Ag and Fisheries, and Dianne Chiaka from Pacific Coast Produce for the work that's being done collaboratively with the Australian Food Cold Chain Council. Sticking to different ways of producing things, we're looking at the Australian prawn industry is worth over $300 million a year to our economy, and losses can occur across the entire supply chain, but it's never been quantified how much or where that's occurring. This particular project is looking at that. It's one of the many supply chain projects that the Fight Food Waste CRC is focused on. There have been a number of identified solutions already for this project, and they're going to be seeing new technical innovations that will be tested on ship to reduce waste and deliver higher value product to market. And Dr. Janet Howison from Curtin University is working very closely with the team that Rachel King's leading in the Australian Council of Prawn Fisheries for this very extensive project. Keeping to the seafood theme, we've got another reduce project looking at how to reduce canning losses. And this one is in abalone, and nearly a third of Australia's abalone production undergoes a specific thermal processing technique, and that can lead to losses. Through addressing this particular factor, that could result in between around 1 to 2% reduction in food loss, which could become up to $1.4 million more in export tonnage, which is a dramatic impact, both positively for the environment as well as for the economy. Dr. Stephen Parle from Sardi and Purser in South Australia, and Mark Webster from the Abalone Association of Australasia Incorporated lead the team on this project. And then I'd like to touch on a bit of a collaborative project that was mentioned by Francesca before in the Transform presentation earlier today. And the first one of those is Project 114, which is a whole of meat supply chain waste mapping interventions. And this project is multi-year and multi-partner project. It's going to be examining waste across that supply chain from farm to fork, but the first phase of this is really looking at beef, at red meat, and looking at that element from the farm to the retail floor. And so finding solutions for meat in this area of the supply chain can have a huge impact, both for obviously reducing food waste, but improving Australia's greenhouse gas emissions and helping hit those targets too. So Dr. Marguerite Renouf from QUT and Long Huynh from MLA, Meat Livestock Australia, are leading the team on this project. And we have another project in the meat space too that I wanted to just touch on, and that's looking at consumer refrigeration behaviour and waste, which obviously affects red meat. Now, this is a fascinating project because a lot of people throw food out without realising that it's potentially safe or unsafe to eat. It's a very common problem that we've discovered through a lot of research in date labelling as well. And the data on refrigeration figures for Australia, that data is usually 20 years old, roughly. And so this particular project is going to provide new temperature and consumer data for those commodities that require chilled storage. And that's going to help inform both industry and consumers better on how to store their food. And it's definitely going to help us with a lot of our other consumer education information. Dr. Simon Lockery from RMIT and Long Huen from the MLA lead the team on this project as well. I'm just going to touch briefly on where we're headed next before I move on to the panel, because I'm conscious of time there. In development, we have a number of projects that are really trying to tackle the big areas, and that's, I touched on date mark labelling before, but another area that is a huge target for the CRC coming forward is in the food service space, both the commercial and the institutional side, about how we can reduce what is considered to be 1.2 million tonnes worth of food waste, or nearly $8 billion worth. And the third area is going to be cold chain. Now, I was going to go through some of the quantification of that in revenue, but I think I'll move through so we can deep dive into packaging, because packaging is a critical part of the story. And in fact, packaging touches food from all the way from paddock to plate. And in the CRC, we have a number of packages. We do have a number of packages. We have a number of projects that are looking at packaging, and I'll just mention three here before we move into the panel. The first is the Safe Food Packaging Criteria and Framework that Nerida Kelton from the Australian Institute of Packaging is running. Second is the consumer perceptions on the role of packaging in reducing food waste. This is where we have Iso Lurival and from Sustainability Victoria, and Lucas Parker from RMIT driving that team. And thirdly, the opportunities for packaging and machinery sector to tackle food waste, which is from Michael Moran from the APPMA, as well as Dr. Mark Leenders from RMIT are driving that particular project. But now onto the panel. Now, we have quite a dynamic team here for this, and I think we'll be doing well to try and keep our discussion for the 30 minutes, but I'd like to ask you to welcome everybody to the panel today. And we have Nerida Kelton, who's going to be joining us, and she's the Executive Director of the Australian Institute of Packaging and the Vice President of Sustainability and Safe Food for the World Packaging Organisation. We have Alan Adams, who's Sustainability Director of APAC for Sealed Air, Michael Dossor, Group General Manager for the Results Group, and Catherine Sayer, who's the CEO of Food SA. I will now stop sharing my screen so that you can welcome everybody. And I would like to invite, don't forget everybody, all of the audience, if you could put any comments or questions into the chat fields, that would be fantastic. And I'll be able to see that and be able to direct those questions to the team. So Nerida and Catherine, I'd like to start with you if that's all right. Now, you're involved with a joint project together, and if I could ask you to briefly explain or outline that particular project and what the objectives and purpose was and how they intersected. In fact, Catherine, if you don't mind starting to tell us a bit about that Food SA Sustainable Packaging project.
Sure, Dianne, and I might just quickly start off with, people might be sort of wondering who we are and what we do. So just very quickly, we're a membership-based organisation, the peak body for food and beverage in South Australia. Those who are interstate, we don't exist in other states. So we exist really to help our industry grow, do a lot of stuff with government, do a lot of stuff with industry and that sort of intermediary in between. So one of the projects, just before we jump into this specific one, is we've just conducted what we're calling an industry census. And that census is really sort of taking the temperature across a whole lot of areas of our industry. But a couple of things I thought were worth mentioning to sort of frame where we think we've got a long way to go is 30% of those who responded were unaware of the 2025 national packaging targets, and another 22% were aware but yet to act. And 37% of those who participated are unaware of the 2030 national waste targets, and another 22% of them are aware but yet to act. So we've known there's a bit of an issue around this for a little while, and really through the CRC, we got to know the Australian Institute of Packaging and Nerida and her team. And so we've been working with them for a little while around what can we do to actually educate our industry, but not only educate, but actually enforce some change. An example that I'd like to give is a project that got somewhat disrupted by COVID, but we managed to, and I hate that word pivot, so we managed to manage. And so basically before COVID hit, we had a couple of Nerida's AIP people down to Adelaide, and we did a tour of the Northern Adelaide Waste Management Authority, their recovery facility. And that was really great context for us to just sort of have a look and smell of what a waste facility is like. And then we actually got everybody in a room, and I know there's been a lot of mention about a collaboration today already, but this is truly something we're trying to engender. So we sat in a room and had a chat with a couple of Nerida's experts. We were then going to all come back and be in the same room and sort of unpick a whole lot of things around packaging and waste, etc. But COVID hit. And one of the really practical outcomes of this was it wasn't just a workshop. So phase 2 was very much about what are some of the solutions and really drilling down to an individual business. So the businesses had to actually video around their factory, submit a questionnaire in advance of then having some one-on-one consultations with AIP. And that was really good because it's not just sitting there and listening, it's actually activating some change in business. So that was really fantastic. And then we ended up with having, again, encouraging that collaboration, getting the group together so that people could share what they'd learned. And it was, really fantastic to have to be able to still do those sort of workshops and that program, as we'd like to call it. So it was. We are now continuing to work with our industry and through AIP to make sure people are increasing their awareness and actually dealing with what they need to deal with, in the next couple of years. So that's sort of a bit of a summary of what we've done on that project.
Thanks, Catherine. Actually, Nerida, do you mind expanding on the specifics of that project from the packaging side of things and I guess some of that activation that Catherine talked about? What did that mean for businesses?
Yeah, thanks for that, Dianne. And Catherine summed it up really well because we weren't expecting COVID to hit in the middle of it, and we had a plan and we had to change our plan, but it was certainly inevitably very successful. For us, what we wanted to achieve through Catherine's brief was to help SMEs really understand the differences between 2025 national packaging targets and 2030 food waste targets. Because unfortunately, a lot of companies just don't understand. And as Catherine said in the recent survey, it's exactly what we think. So it's really important to start with the why. And it's really important to set the understanding of both of the targets and why we have both of the targets and how we're trying to find optimal packaging or the sweet spot in the middle somehow to balance those two targets. So the particular project we worked with Food SA on was very much hands-on, very much interactive and working one-on-one with SMEs. And what's important about that is that every SME has different challenges and they have different barriers. So we brought in a number of our phenomenal experts in packaging to work with them, and they absolutely loved this project, Dianne. It seriously was one of their most favourite projects because they love the opportunity to work with every single small business by themselves individually. And I think for us, we've seen some fantastic outcomes, Catherine, and we're really proud of it because it's just such a wonderful example of a great collaboration through the CRC.
That's fantastic. I was wondering, with the Save Food project that you're running, Nerida, how did that intersect as well, the Safe Food Packaging project, with this one? Or what was the intersection points for that?
Well, I think the intersection point is the two targets and the fact that they both rest under the term sustainability. There is a lot of conversation around the world around consumers driving the discussion, particularly around waste and plastic waste and packaging waste. But we do need to take it back to the conversation around sustainability and lowering environmental impacts. And lowering environmental impacts can be obviously through food waste targets, but it can also be through sustainable packaging targets and waste targets. So it is really important to intersect the two. You cannot have a conversation about packaging waste or plastics waste without having a conversation about the environmental impacts of food waste and the environmental impacts of that, because it's really, really important people understand that if we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about lowering all environmental impacts across the ecosystem. So for us, our Save Food Packaging project is slightly different. We're very much focused around trying to design better packaging, more intuitive and innovative packaging that ultimately reduces and prevents and minimises food waste. And for us, it's really important to have this project because we know anecdotally what the industry is doing, and we know anecdotally what packaging designers and technologists are doing and not doing in terms of safe food packaging design. But we felt when the CRC was first developed that we really wanted to be a part of the CRC because we wanted to get the science and the research, and we didn't have all of that. We just had anecdotal conversations. So working with RMIT, we've established this project called Safe Food Packaging. And the most interesting thing is that we didn't want it to be academically led. We wanted this one to be industry led. And that's why we have established a consortium. And obviously we have two of the wonderful experts in our consortium here today, but it was really important for us to establish it as an industry-led project. So we have the advantage that we have a fabulous academic arm in RMIT, and they're helping us with our research reports and all of the science that we need for this project. But we also have a consortium of industry experts that are helping to establish our safe food packaging guidelines. Because at the end of the day, our objective is to design safe food packaging more intuitively and more innovatively at the start so that we can minimise, reduce and prevent food waste in the households. And that's the goal.
Yeah, and actually I know we were going to talk about collaboration in a minute, but while we're just on that aspect of the project and those guidelines, I might bring Michael and Alan into the discussion as well. Now, Michael, can I ask for your views on this too? What the role of packaging in food waste? Like, how do the packaging projects that we've got going and the guidelines, why are they important to industry, and how have you seen this in the work that you've been involved with in the CRC?
I think they're critical. I mean, I've spent the first 6 months in the project with my eyes bulging out of my head. I learned as much as I was able to put in, and I didn't realise, the time that we'd spent in the industry, and some of the things that we've done, and how important they were, and how maybe some in some ways a little bit ahead of their time, without trying to sound like an egomaniac. But what became apparent very quickly is we didn't have the tools to communicate those to brand owners, to packaging designers, and everybody that went along. So the work that we do, we're collaborating every day in everything that we do. A typical example is a food waste project is around reclose systems. A lot of the work that we do in the market is integrating those into existing capital equipment, form, fill and seal machines. So we need to work with the manufacturer of the form, fill and seal machine or the agent. It's working with the supplier of the packaging. A good segue for me to maybe hand over to Alan. In projects in that environment, if we don't have, and then our own expertise in the adhesives and the development of those things, if we don't align all of those things, then we've got no project. And it's well proven that reseal, reclose packaging will reduce food waste in the home. That's where we know from all of the data that we're seeing. So I think the collaboration piece is vitally important. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Michael, definitely. And I think that segue to yourself, Alan, would be a good one, because some of the stuff that you guys have been doing at Sealed Air really is in this sort of space. Did you want to talk to the importance there of that packaging and food waste and what we need to be doing in this space?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Dianne, and nice segue. Thanks, Michael. Look, first off, just want to say we're very enthusiastic about this project and so pleased to be invited in, because essentially Cryovac brand food packaging stands for extending the shelf life, protecting food and enabling food supply chains, particularly around fresh proteins around the world and locally here in Australia. So look, we think that packaging is completely critical to enabling those supply chains, giving us great results, protection, cross-contamination avoidance, all of these things, facilitating automation, delivering shelf life, all the things that we need to do to ensure that consumers eat all the food that's available, that they purchase, and have a great eating experience is, a big part of that. This initiative and its intersection with food waste, where does packaging intersect? To me, one of the great opportunities we have here is that designing packaging is at one point in the supply chain. Waste is impacted in many other parts, and particularly, as Michael talked about, impact of waste at the household level is not well understood. There isn't a great feedback loop back to the design of the pack point. And I think that's really where this project will deliver so much value. It gives designers insights into impacts all the way along the supply chain to enable food that had been wasted in the past to be recovered, to be enjoyed, and for us to minimize that waste.
And that's actually the comment you make there, Alan, as well, I think highlights why the Fight Food Waste CRC project that's been exploring consumer perceptions on packaging as well is an important one to be gathering those insights that will also help inform the sorts of changes that can be made in the future and just the communication around that as well. But I'd like to move back to the Nerida, you touched on it before, and as well, Catherine, around that challenge of understanding and knowing what people have to do in the industry around the 2025 national packaging target, almost versus to some of them the 2030 food waste targets. It's a bit of a paradox, and it's a hot topic in the sector at the moment. Nerida, did you want to expand on that a little bit further to explain what those challenges are, but how there could be ways of resolving it?
It is a real challenge, because we have to find, as I was saying, we have to find the sweet spot, the optimum pack design, and it can be really challenging, and there can be trade-offs, but there can also be unintended consequences if we don't design it right at the start. So we're all challenged by it. All packaging technologists and designers are challenged by it. And I know Michael and Alan see it every single day, because the louder conversation around sustainability is around packaging waste and plastics. But sometimes plastics is a required necessity for minimizing and reducing food waste. And so we have to have an open and honest conversation around the true role of packaging and why we have packaging and the ultimate value that it brings to minimizing food waste. And I don't think as an industry we're very good at that. And I'm sure that Michael and Alan will have some thoughts on that, as will Catherine from her project, because I just think we need to do better as an industry to communicate that more effectively. Why do we have packaging? What value can it bring to minimizing food waste? And also to communicate it to consumers better.
Yeah, that's an important point there, to sort of looking across the sector as well as out to the users as well. And I might ask, Alan, if you don't mind commenting on that, because I know this is something that you've had some success with, some real innovations in this area that I believe you won an award for in some solutions to reduce waste as well as improve packaging.
Yeah, thanks. Again, this is at the heart of good outcomes for all of us, for our environment, and balancing the climate impact, the total sustainability impact and the circularity of packaging is a challenging question. What I really like is to aspire to the vision of bolting the two concepts together, a low carbon circular economy, meaning that we need to look at the impacts of the packaging circularity systems that we're building and ensure that we continue to deliver and continue to drive towards better outcomes in food waste as well. And I think that it's so important to look along the total supply chain to see what all the outcomes can be. Dianne, you mentioned some of the awards. Extending shelf life and extending the saleability of product has a great opportunity both at the household level. We've got more time to eat it, more time to have a good experience with the food. But at the same time, perhaps one of the most interesting products we won an award for was enabling avocado paste to have a really long shelf life. 90 days, even out to 120 days. Now, guacamole doesn't sound like it could ever last for that long, right? It goes brown really quick. But the unseen win of that was really enabling a wider processing window for the avocado growers. And what that means is that more of the crop was able to be recovered, enabled sale, wider distribution, and gave a longer processing window, meaning that basically of all this fruit grown, less was just left on the ground to rot and we move on to next year. And I think that examples like that are really at the heart of how we think about the total impact across the supply chain and sustainability.
Yeah, that does lead me to think about that the continued importance of collaboration, but also education. I know, Michael, I know that's something that you work with a lot of your clients with too. Like, how do you work with your clients in that machinery and packaging space to ensure that they understand by adopting such practices that businesses and customers can have enhanced opportunities?
I'm going to call this out for what it is. I'm going to say that's a work in progress. Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat this, because at the end of the day, the innovation that Alan just spoke about there is a typical example, and they're lining up. You look at the awards that you'll see come forward in the next couple of years, some of the developments that are going on, particularly in outside of fresh produce, bakery is another big sector. But it all comes back to the consumer's understanding. Okay, I'm in Victoria, so I'm only just allowed to have barbecues now. But you stand around and there's a bunch of research data coming out now, which is really, really scary, because the consumer doesn't know how much they're throwing away. Ask somebody that question when you're standing at the pub by the barbecue or whatever the case may be. When they understand just how much we're all throwing away as a consumer, you watch the eyes bulge that I spoke about before. Then all of a sudden, but you ask that without preempting it, you ask somebody about the plastics in the packaging at that same barbecue, and they'll talk to you for half an hour about how bad the plastic is. There's the issue. That's the bridge we have to cross, because no matter what we say as packaging development people or packaging people or professionals with all of this knowledge to brand owners, it's the consumer that calls the shots, and they're the ones that the marketing department listens to. And that's, I'll get off my soapbox in a second, but that is the scariest part in this whole angle. So it really is a work in progress, and that's what needs to come from these guidelines and these learnings and these pilots is, what, we're all measured on sales and we've got to sell more. That's just business 101. We can still sell just as much. We can actually sell a bit more, and we can stop the food waste. Link those three things together, and then all of a sudden, and the packaging targets as well, which are vitally important, and every bit of development that we're doing is around that sort of stuff, then we've got a winning combination. The two have to come in and be seen as the same level within the general consumer marketplace. At the moment, I challenge the country that they're not.
Yeah, and I think that's the value of undertaking these projects, as well as the consumer perception stuff, because it's going to give us the language and areas to tackle to move forward to find resolution here. Catherine, I wouldn't mind asking your thoughts here, because as Michael touched on the intersection of the two again, the national packaging target as well as the 2030 food waste targets. How did you manage to get some of those SMEs what direction did they take after that? What's been the follow-up?
Well, I'll coin that phrase. It's a bit of a work in progress as well, but it is so interesting because when we were doing these workshops, I could hear people say plastic isn't all bad, and that's sort of this conversation that we're having now, and I couldn't agree more about the consumers are what drives the retailers to then drive the manufacturers to respond. So the more education consumers have, by far the better. I think from our point of view, we're just trying to facilitate that information for practical change. And I think the most important thing is identifying people in businesses that actually are champions, because if there's not the champions at reasonably senior level, the change isn't going to happen. So from our organisation's point of view, we need to keep trying to educate our industry so that they don't get slapped in the face 6 months out and can't actually meet any of the target requirements. So it's just really important for us to keep raising that profile, but it's equally important for consumers to have a really good understanding of what's good and what's bad and what those trade-offs are. And as we've sort of talked about, meeting that middle ground.
Yeah, and it's just the plastics aren't bad I think it's one of the things that came through as well with some of the consumer perceptions is this balance, and when they start to understand that it could be part of the solution, not necessarily a problem, is part of the communication I think we'll need to move forward with. And I see we've got a question in the Q&A around bioplastics in particular, and someone's interested to see what work is going on in that sort of space for our packaging. So I don't know who'd be best to just speak to this here. Would it be yourself, Alan, or Nerida?
Well, maybe I can make a couple of comments. Yep. I've been involved in the Bioplastics Association as a founding member and former president, so I keep a little bit of a watch over the space. Bioplastics have an excellent role to play in facilitating better food waste recovery outcomes. But in terms of a packaging system, we need to find the right places to use that kind of technology where it's delivering additional value that derives a better sustainability outcome and a better food waste outcome. So one of the areas talked about for high engagement would be, for example, if we want better outcomes for the food waste we do generate in our households, how do we get that collected and processed appropriately rather than heading to landfill? Now, having containers on our benchtop and benchtop tidies and the right packaging that can be processed along with the food would be a good outcome. In general thinking, bioplastics as a circular means of driving circularity into packaging generally set apart from the circularity driven by recycling, because it is a longer process of make, use, and then compost, reuse in that way. So it's a good recovery technology, but it is quite different to recycling. And those things need to be balanced up to ensure that it's the right choice for the application.
Yeah, and Dianne, if I could just jump in as well, I think that when we're discussing bioplastics, there are appropriate markets and there are appropriate sectors, and it's really important to understand that at the moment in this country there are only certain suitable appropriate markets. So we have to ensure, particularly around sustainable targets, we have to ensure that we're not contaminating recycling streams, which is really critical to our target conversations. So certainly there are appropriate markets. Food service and hospitality are perfect examples of it, and they have closed loop collection processes for it and are very, very successful. The FOGO programs that are currently being growing around the country, and with all of the funding that the federal government is putting into the FOGO programs, will certainly improve the infrastructure and the collection capabilities of our country. So it's all positive news for in a couple of years. So I think it's a work in progress. And I think that the bioplastics industry is certainly moving in the right direction with incredible support from federal and state governments.
Thanks, Nerida and Alan for commenting on that. I notice we're just about out of time, so I'll have to sadly cut our panel short now. I know there's a few more questions I would have liked to have gotten to, but one of the themes that I think has come out of the discussion today has been one of ongoing collaboration. as well as work in progress and thinking of fit for purpose. So this is an area where we need to ensure ongoing research to find the right solutions at the right time with the right customer group and end user. So I'd like to invite everybody in the audience today to thank our fantastic panel, Catherine, Michael, Nerida and Alan, and also great thanks to Catherine Dean as well for her keynote before. Now we're about to go on to a break. I'd like to just invite you to go and have a stretch. You've got a half-hour break, grab a bite to eat, jump into the networking section of the portal, and we'll reconvene in 30 minutes time at 2 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time for our third session of the day, where we'll hear from the Stop Food Waste Australia team. Thanks very much.